Hi, welcome to Books Along the Teche Writers Track, Books Along the Teche Literary Festival Writing Track. Um, we're going to have Jan Risher speak about telling your own story. Jan is currently the features editor at The Advocate in Baton Rouge and editor of Louisiana Inspired for the Times-Picayune, The Advocate, and Acadian Advocate. So let's get ready to hear about the elements needed to tell your story in a way that makes other people listen.
Thank you so
Welcome,
much.
Jane.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So I'm going to start my timer so that I stop talking when I'm supposed to stop talking. And there we go. All right. How's that? We're good. All right. Thank y'all so much for being here. I mean, it's like God said, "Ooh, we're going to make this beautiful this weekend." So it is just such a great time to be here. In fact, I was planning to leave right after I spoke, but my hostess doesn't know this yet necessarily unless she's reading her text. I've asked, may I spend one more night? So thank y'all so much for joining me. I have been writing for a long time and in and out of journalism. Went to Mississippi State, go Dogs, and actually became a high school English teacher. That's what my training is. But in one form or the other, it's always been about storytelling for me. And I come from a long family of storytellers. And before I get started with my presentation, I thought I have been a weekly newspaper columnist for really almost 25 years, every single week, never missed a single week. That's a lot of weeks, y'all. So I thought that I would start by reading one of my columns, and then we'll go into the presentation. And this is my book. It's called Looking to the Stars from Old Algiers, and it is my friends call it Jan Risher's greatest hits. But it's really from 2002 to 2017. It's just the pick of my columns. And this is the title column. They're not all serious, but this one happens to be. And this was from actually 2015, the 10-year mark of Katrina. So here we go. Sorry. I really am going to get it. I'm in 2016. Okay, there you go. I had it marked all along. Okay, so this is from August the 30th, 2015. All hope isn't lost, and this is how I know. On Thursday, my husband and I drove to New Orleans and sat on a bench in Jackson Square, waiting. My husband didn't mind carrying the oversized gift bag that contained a small red telescope, glow-in-the-dark ceiling stars, and copies of A Diary of a Wimpy Kid and The Lightning Thief. I had never met the young man I bought the gifts for, but amidst the Katrina anniversary hubbub, he was celebrating the 10-year anniversary of his birth. I wanted to be there to celebrate with him and his mama. Every now and then, the stars align and the universe, along with every one thing in it, seems to want to be certain that we keep hope alive. Thursday was one of those nights. It was also one of those nights that makes me reconsider the ancient Chinese belief that each of us who are supposed to meet are connected by an invisible red thread, which may be long and twisty. However, if we're supposed to meet, eventually we will. 10 years ago, in the wake of Katrina, a young mother named Kiana Ruffin ended up at Lafayette's Cajun Dome as an evacuee. In the chaos of thousands of people in the Cajun Dome parking lot, Kiana grabbed me as I walked past. She's not sure why I was the one. All I know is there were lots of other people around, and Kiana was distraught, bordering on hysterical. When she told me what was wrong, I understood why. In the course of the storm, levees breaking, and hospitals evacuating, she had gotten separated from her newborn son. Someone had given her a tiny list of 7 hospitals with their phone numbers where her son might be. She had called these numbers repeatedly, but no one seemed to know where her son was. By the time our paths crossed, she had been searching for him and seeking help from any and all sources for 3 days. Once I started making phone calls and queries for her, other volunteers got involved, and we were able to find the baby within an hour. We didn't call any different or magic numbers than the ones she had already been trying, but for reasons long, complex, and sad enough to make me cry forever, when I asked the same questions trying to locate her newborn son she had been asking for 3 days, we got a different answer. The baby was in Baton Rouge. A volunteer took the parents to pick him up, and the Ruffin family was gone from my life. They left me with much to consider, primarily the lesson of responsibility that those of us who have a voice have for those who don't. That lesson was seared in my soul in a way it hadn't been previously. And for 10 years, that's where the story ended for me. Back then, when I got back to the newsroom, I wrote a news story about it with all the news of the day. My story ran on page 2A. Typically, that would have been a front page story. I never forgot their names and have searched for them to no avail. But 2 weeks ago, Kiana Ruffin sent me a Facebook message and told me her son really wanted to meet me. My husband and I decided to come to New Orleans and throw him a little birthday celebration. Wrapping up Katrina's most lingering story was a good way to mark the 10-year anniversary of Katrina. The invisible red thread connecting us was definitely a long and tangled one, but Keldon Ruffin Jr. and I finally met Thursday night. As I was planning our evening, I considered taking Kiana and Keldon to my favorite New Orleans restaurant, Irene's, which at the time was on St. Philip at the end of the French Quarter. I called to make a reservation, explain the circumstances of our celebratory dinner. Chef Nicholas Scalco, son of owner Irene, called me back. He and I had never met either, but we had one of those conversations that restores your faith in humanity. He told me he was a dad and couldn't imagine what Kiana had gone through. He assured me he and his staff would make the night one to remember and asked if he could take our photograph to hang on the wall of his restaurant. From the moment we arrived, Chef Scalco and his team went to unheard heights to make our unlikely party of 4 feel special. They did little and big things all night long that still make my eyes well up. It was a night of 1,000 small, beautiful things, tinged with moments of clarifying heartbreak. Things like Kiana pulling her 10-year-old copy of the story I wrote about her search for her son that ran in the Daily Advertiser. She explained that the very tattered copy was one of her most prized possessions. She keeps it in her box of special things, but it had clearly seen better days. Things like the whole restaurant stopping to celebrate with us when they brought out a birthday cake with a tall, sparkling candle for Keldon. And in that moment, it felt like they were really with us, all rooting for Kiana and Keldon. Things like the chef taking a photograph of our party of 4 to frame and put on the wall of his restaurant alongside other photographs of more likely suspects. Things like Kiana and I having a real conversation about what she needs to do to get her GED. Things like Keldon telling us he wants to be a football player when he grows up, and Kiana quickly telling him he has to get an education first. Things like the story of their neighbor who is also rooting for them, who made special arrangements to bring them to the French Quarter that night. Things like walking with them to dinner to meet the bus that would take them home. It was a walk that felt a lot like being Cinderella after the ball. The chef and I could do what we could do to make the night special, and it was. But the reality was they had to go back to a life that is not an easy one. The experience of meeting Kiana 10 years ago has through the years made me contemplate what is necessary to teach people who don't know how to be their own best advocates to do a better job of getting people to listen to them. I am not certain a well-designed program will work. Maybe the only solution is when one end of the red thread meets the other, that we figure out how it is we can help each other. And we keep doing so until it doesn't make sense anymore. Surely we are a long way from that. In the meantime, there is a little boy near Old Algiers who has a red telescope now. I hope and pray that he will continue to look toward the stars. I get emotional because now it's been almost 9 years and I know all the things that have happened. And I've tried my best to keep up and do what I could to help their family. And it's just sad. That's the only situation, the only word I can come up. All right. So shift gears for just a moment. If I ask you what you think is at the crux of a good story, what would you say? And there's not a wrong answer. Honesty. I agree. What else? Connection. Oh, thank you. What else? Bing, 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 bing. Give the woman a Frigidaire. All right. So I think that all of those things are a part of a good story, but at the crux of every great story is the potential to change, the proof of change. And so, through our lives, we have all changed. We continue. I pray to whatever is out there that I pray that we continue to grow and change. And sometimes when we're thinking about telling our own story, we're looking at this giant overarching story. And maybe let's reconsider that for a moment. What if we don't think about that one big story, but life is a series of little stories. And some of those little stories are really the big story. All right. So one of my absolute favorite quotes is credited to St. Augustine. I'm going to read it to you. There's enough to think about here for a long time. I could just read it and then we could just sit here and think about it quietly. But I won't. I'll keep talking. All right, here it goes. The deepest desire of the human heart is to belong, to be welcomed, to know you are seen and worthy of kindness. I'm going to read it one more time. The deepest desire of the human heart is to belong, to be welcomed, to know you are seen and worthy of kindness. I mean, honestly, what more are we looking for in this world than to walk into a room and basically feel the love of people who get you? Is there anything better than that? And the great irony is that so often, I'm a mom. My daughter was just outside New York City, and her pictures fell off the wall this morning with the earthquake. But watching your children do this thing sometimes, they're all okay. Everybody's okay. Watching your children is so painful sometimes because I have seen my daughter not be herself, and it's just if you could just be yourself, because it's this vicious cycle of, being yourself leads to connection. Not being yourself leads to disconnection. Let's talk more about that. And quote, not St. Augustine, but we'll call her St. Brene Brown. She says that shame is the fear of disconnection. And so if, at the core of our guts, what we're really seeking is the connection with people, which is the deepest desire of the human heart, to belong, to be welcome, to know you are seen and worthy of kindness, then it's that whole thing about the stories that we tell others and the stories we tell ourselves that might not be completely honest, that might not be the truth. But it's that vicious circle, fear of disconnection, tell a better story, leads to more disconnection, tell the truth, leads to connection, So the underpinning of I'm not good enough is excruciating vulnerability. That's more from Brene. So sometimes when we tell our stories, we do so, I would say most of the time, or maybe our gut instinct in telling stories is to make ourselves look better And so we bypass that vulnerability part. So part of what I'm hopeful that you will take away from today is just to be conscious of your own storytelling and conscious of your own default mode in storytelling. And that's Rosie, and we're glad she's here. So I don't know if anyone else in here read the Surgeon General's report last year on the epidemic of isolation and loneliness, but I keep going back to it time and time again, because I really believe that it speaks so much about where we are. And so I keep thinking, what can we do? What can we do to try to make that better? And one of the things, aside from storytelling and story circles, which we're going to talk about in a moment, but one of the things that I believe could make that better is something that's called contra dancing. Has anyone else in here ever done contra dancing? And so I just had a big birthday, and I had a giant contra dance for my birthday, and 70 people came, and almost no one there had ever contra danced. Though we did have the professionals, because if you don't have some people who know what's going on, it's just not going to work. But I did it partially because, number one, I just love it. Unlike a lot of people, I love being in a place where I don't actually speak the language. It's one of my favorite places because when I'm in a place where I don't speak the language, the only things I can really focus on communicating have to be really important. Communicating, including understanding, have to be really important, And so contra dancing is a little bit like that, because if you don't know what's going on, you just have to pay attention with all of your senses to be in the right place at the right time, or you're going to mess everybody up. It's kind of like Celtic square dancing, if you're wondering what it is. So there's a caller who's telling you what to do, where to go, and I love having to have all those senses on and being dependent on other people. And what it does, and what it did for my party, is it took all these people who live pretty buttoned up lives, most of them, and aren't used to being in a place doing things that a contra dancing caller is telling them to do. And it made them vulnerable. And that magic happened when we are vulnerable. We're able to connect to the people we're with. And then we're able to laugh and just be who we really are. So if you don't take anything else away, try contra dancing. Because whenever we want connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen. And to, what is the fun of connecting to people if we're pretending to be something that we aren't, And if we're telling the stories that aren't the real stories. All right. So, Brene Brown, I could go on and on and on, I won't. But she says that there are basically, she's done all this research. I think they interviewed like 6,000 people about people who have what she called are able to make connections. And she said it comes down to a sense of worthiness, and that there are two basic groups of people who believe they have a sense of love and belonging, and people who don't. It's not about beauty. It's not about smarts. It's not about money. It's not about anything else. It's if you believe you have a sense of love and belonging and you're worthy of that, then you do. So how can we do that? And I believe stories are part of the answer of that. A story circle. How many of you have ever done a story circle? Anybody? I don't really think they're much of a thing. So had someone said yes, I would have been a little surprised. But basically, I think that you can do it with just one other person, but it works really well if you do it with 8 people. And you each go around a circle and you tell a story. Now, you can try to tell your life story, but here is what makes a story circle work. A timer. Because invariably, y'all know what happens. And it's not like somebody really is trying to talk more than anybody else, but that's just what happens. And so if you have a timer and you have a strict limit and your timer has to have a loud buzzer and you have to set the rules in advance to say one person is going to speak at a time, no one asks questions, no one does anything except for listening. And in most cases, I usually do 4 minutes. So, sounds simple enough, right? I hope you think so, because we're going to try in a few minutes. We're going to try a one-on-one version, so just know that. The thing, though, that all these people who have a sense of worthiness have in common is they're courageous people. So, all you French speakers out there, what is the root of the word courage? Or how do, okay, how do you say heart in French? Cur. And so originally the word courage was I wrote the definition here. The Latin word is cor, C-O-R, and courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Isn't that beautiful? So that clearly goes directly back to storytelling. So I have this side gig. I have a job, but I have a side gig because I love doing it. I help students who are approaching graduation, either high school or college, come up with their essays, their entrance exam essays, I'm sorry. So what do you think oftentimes they'll say, oh, I've already written mine. And I said, okay, let's read it. 99 times out of 100, it is all the great things. They were the vice president of the Junior High Beta Club. They were, it's all the great things that they've done. If I am an admissions counselor and I'm reading 100 essays in a day, probably, I've talked to a few, 90 of them are going to be that essay. By number 2, the vice president of the Junior High Beta Club is just not very interesting. So what do you think is more interesting? Telling a story that is not like this overarching thing, but something that is about a specific incident. So if you have a piece of paper or something, what I want you to do right now is, and if you don't, you can write it on your phone, you can write it on your program, whatever you want. I've probably got some paper in my bag up here. I want you to think about your life, and I want you to think of stories that you could tell, just little things that happened. I did this at a workshop about a month ago, and this one woman told a story. She said, about that time, my grandmother tried to cut my parrot's toenails. I didn't say my parent, my parrot's toenails. So let that be, the parrot died. So here is your assignment. Find someone in the room who you don't know. You're each going to take a turn, and for 4 minutes each, you're going to speak, and the other person listens. You don't comment. You don't ask questions. You just listen. And you're going to tell a story. You can tell one of the stories that you wrote down on your paper, or you can start from the beginning and tell as much of your own life story as 4 minutes will allow. But I'm going to ask you to be as courageous as possible in telling the unvarnished truth. All right?